Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on Clarity7 tips and tricks. On behalf of Clear Insight, we're glad to have many on the call here, many that we know, many that are clients of ours, and some new ones as well. We'll just give another 30 or 40 seconds for a few more to join, and then we will begin shortly. Okay, well, I think we have a large majority of the ones now on the call that had registered in, and we're very glad to have everyone here. As you know from the invite, this webinar is a webinar for Clarity7 tips and tricks, and I know that many of you on the call are experienced experts in your own right in Clarity. Some of you are newer to Clarity, and we hope that we'll be able to touch on the various needs that each of you will have during this call today. And so we're looking for a time together. As in the past, we will be wanting to take your questions. So let me encourage you right now as we go through the call to make sure in the chat window there that you type in your questions as we go along. There may be opportunity to answer in writing to your question as it's going along, but any that we don't do, we will pick up at the Q&A at the end, and we're going to try and leave lots of time at the end for Q&A. So please make sure you put your questions into the chat. This is probably more of an interactive webinar than some others in the past, and so we're looking forward to having that interaction with each of you on the call today. So be sure and do that. All right. So hopefully everybody is seeing my screen. So our agenda today is we're going to just do some introduction and objectives. Then we're going to move into a Q&A, get you involved. We've got 3 different little questions that we're going to put out to each of you in the audience to help us understand together what stage everybody's at with their Clarity projects and their Clarity experience and where you're going with Clarity. And then, of course, some of your key pain points that you're looking to have help with. At that point, then, I'm going to turn it over to our experts, and we'll be going through some key tips and tricks that we've chosen from our list of various solutions we've provided to customers in the past and demonstrate those, and then we're going to have Q&A and wrap up. And there will no doubt be more time, hopefully, than just the 10 minutes at the end for the Q&A. So on the call today, myself, Ian Margerison with Business Development. We have Bob Gill, one of our lead architects and very experienced in Clarity for many years. Kit Chan, our services leader, also on the call, one of our experts in Clarity, and Susan Mallett, Clear Insight President, on the call as well today. And Susan will be helping with the discussion and questions as well as our polls as we go through it. Okay, so for I know most of you on the call know who we are, but just a quick highlight again for those who may not be as familiar with us at Clear Insight. Here we are, of course, an advanced IBM business partner specializing in Cognos. We focus a lot towards the Office of Finance with much experience in the business of finance, as well as business intelligence and disclosure management. So we've got a list of clients from across North America in many different verticals. And in addition to Clarity, we support customers on the Cognos suite with TM1, Cognos Express, and Cognos Business Intelligence. And would be happy to provide any insight if some of you may not be working with us right now and you're looking for some help in Clarity and or wondering what to do next beyond Clarity. We're more than happy to have a discussion with you on the phone and follow up at a later date. So our objectives today, really it's to give you a better day with Clarity7 every day. Many of you are working every day with Clarity, and as we well know, when you run into challenges and these sometimes small things, sometimes big things that are annoying that you have to overcome and go through, we're hoping that there's some tips and tricks that we can bring forward that will give you more efficiency and a better time with Clarity as you move forward. We, of course, are looking to gain some insight on where you are at with Clarity7 and help take you to the next steps, and as well make our experts available to you for specific questions with your Clarity solutions, and then of course to introduce Clear Insight for those of you who may not be as familiar with us. Okay, so moving right along, our first poll, just to get an understanding of where folks are at, and obviously when you're running into challenges with Clarity, it will depend to some degree on the version that you're using of Clarity. So a good way to start that will help our experts, first of all, is what version of Clarity are you on? Are you on the latest version, FixPack 2, version 7.2.1, or are you on a 7.0 version but not quite up to FixPack 2, or are you back on the original architecture, of course, which is quite old now, one of the version 6 editions, which is no longer in support with IBM, and I'm sure you're familiar with that, but we do know many people who are still on 6, so you're not alone if that's where you're at. So I'll ask Susan to open up the poll now for us, and if you could each take a minute and make your selections as to what version of Clarity you're currently on. That would be very helpful to us, and I'm sure will be of interest to each of you on the call as well. All right, I'll just give you another 5 seconds or so for the few remaining ones to make your selections in there. All right, that's excellent. Wonderful. Susan, you could close up the poll, and everybody should be able to see there now. We've got a good cross-section. Almost 40% of you are right up to date on the latest version. Almost 90% of you are on version 7, which is fantastic, and then a few of you are on the earlier version. So that will help Bob and Kit as they're going through this and answering some of the questions, knowing what version you are on. But certainly some of the challenges, if you're on one of the earlier versions, we're happy to answer those questions as well. Okay, so our next question for you, our second of 3 questions, is what is your corporate, your company's strategic plans with Clarity? We're looking for one answer. Are you intending to stick with Clarity at least for the next 2 to 3 years and of course upgrade and keep going along with Clarity? Or is there discussions and investigations? Are you thinking about transitioning to Cognos Express in the coming year or so, to Cognos TO1 in the coming year or so? Or you're not sure, but there's talk about going to a new Cognos solution a couple of years out? Or ultimately, or is there also investigation at alternatives? So to help us and everybody will be of interest again, just kind of what's your plans with Clarity7? Many of you are on 7 already, so it'll be interesting to see where you're thinking of going. So the poll is open now, and just put in your thoughts there. Answers are coming in quickly. If everybody can make sure you've made a selection, that would be great. Okay, the large majority are in there. We'll just give you another 5 seconds or so. If you haven't answered, just make a choice there. All right, very good. Susan, if you could close that up. And as I kind of expected, working with a number of clients who are on Clarity, especially if you're now up to version 7 and it's doing the job for you, there's a lot of value in driving as much return on your Clarity investment as you can and sticking with it for a number of years. And so that's, as we work with our Clarity clients, very much in many cases, the right decision is to stick with it unless there's other reasons why they need to move on. So 80% of you are going to stick with Clarity, and then a few are thinking about some alternatives further out. So all the more reason that we can help you with tips and tricks to give you value over the next couple of years with your Clarity solution. Okay, the last question around the pain points. Now, there's a lot of pain points that we could cover. Our poll solution only lets us have 5 selections. So in the absence of putting our 5th one, we put down another. If Susan, you could open up the poll, and here you can select all that can apply rather than just selecting one option as in the previous questions. So make some selections there on what kind of pain you're feeling with Clarity. Many of you are doing very well with Clarity, but where there's some issues, what areas might they be in? All right, we're getting up there in numbers. We'll just give you another 5 seconds or so to put your answers in. Okay, wonderful. Susan, if you could close that up for us. And I'm sure this is of interest to each of you and what folks have responded. Over 50% of you are having challenges with certain processes taking too long, and I know Bob is going to cover some of those things. Templates running too slow, and we're happy to say that there are ways to resolve those issues. And then some of the other items, 40% of you have other, so please make sure, again, you're putting your comments and your questions into chat if we're not touching on those, and of course we'll try and answer them in Q&A, and if we even don't get time to do that, then we will follow up with you directly after the fact as well to try and help you out. All right, wonderful. Thanks for your help and your participation with those questions. And so at this point, I will turn you over to Bob Gill, who will take you through what he's outlined, and then we'll move from there into the Q&A. Bob, if you're there, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, I just make myself presenter here, if I can do that. So I really appreciate everyone putting in their pain points there. I want to try and readjust some of my information here to address those in particular. I think that's very helpful to know, really who's listening for what pieces here. I think just a little bit of housekeeping stuff. Please ask questions through the chat. I think those are the most important questions to get answered, the questions from everyone on the call, rather than just talking about some of the topics we already have prepared. Just like Ian said, if you see something that might help you and you'd like some assistance, we're here to help. So feel free to ask questions now, or you can follow questions later on. And what I've done, selected some of the common pain points across these different categories, and we'll kind of go through those together. There will be a Q&A session, Q&A part at the end, and also thanks for everyone that put those questions in when they registered. So I've got some stuff prepared to address any of those questions as well. So let's start with processes failing. So here's some common concerns I hear. Versioning always screws up. There's the cube refresh takes too long. I can't see if a process worked. I can't test and roll back changes without a DBA. So I'm not surprised to hear that's a pretty common pain point from folks. The good news is there's lots of options to address it. This one's more of a technical one, so I'll kind of talk through a couple of different pieces, but I want to make, just in the interest of time, I may come back to this one if we have time at the end. So versioning in particular is a pretty common solution. People have some kind of a tool where they will copy data from one scenario and year to another, usually maybe copying a forecast to a budget or vice versa. Maybe they're trying to copy their actuals into part of their forecast. What I see as a challenge is there's not usually a lot of email feedback to know whether things have worked, data validation, really a part of it fails, you end up with garbled data. So all of this really comes back to data quality. So part of the challenge here is, well, how do you know when things are working when they're not? So it's all well and good to know that, okay, well, I see a message that something failed. What does that really tell me? So what I want to talk about just for a couple minutes is the visibility side of things. So if we look at, here are some we call them data validation or data quality reports that we tend to do for each of our clients. And they give us a chance to validate that the numbers are as we expect. And sometimes you're validating, does what you have in dev match what's in production? Maybe you're validating a reporting cube versus a planning cube. Maybe you're validating one scenario to another. But what's common in all these cases is you want to look for variances. You want to make sure you pull one list, pull another list, you do the variance, and everything should be, if everything ties, all the variances should be 0. And if there is something, then you want to be able to identify what's that one piece and drill into that without having to look at large Excel spreadsheets trying to find the one cell that's different. So here we are in Clarity Studio. I tried to make the design pretty straightforward. I got rid of a lot of the formatting. I just want to talk about the major pieces here. Here we're going to take our accounts, our measures, and our time along our rows. We're going to pull data from one cube here. In this case, it's a reporting cube. And then we're going to pull data from a planning cube as well. And we just do the variance. So just on the sheet, it's just as simple as you'd think. A minus B. And then at the very top, you do a sum of all the variance to see, well, is there any variance in this stuff? So simple case, you can do all this in Excel. It's not that exciting. But when you start adding the Clarity Studio power on top of that, you can start making selections around, let's change my view to split view. So you can start having multiple accounts you can select, multiple measures, different values, different entities. So really the Clarity Studio tool, you can really create your own test tool. So everyone's probably pretty comfortable making templates and reports with Clarity Studio, but not all of us make test tools out of them. And this is something that the C-level execs are never going to see this kind of a report or tool. But if someone comes to you and says, these numbers don't look quite right, this is where you can go, and very quickly you can get an idea. You can look down exactly at that data at whatever level you choose to see if there is something there or is there not something there. So it tends to answer those questions of people not really trusting the numbers. And in some cases it's true, it uncovers an issue. There is a variance between two pieces, but you get to focus in on that very quickly rather than trying to hunt around for where the variance would be and what it might be. Now if you take this idea a little further, you can start playing with calculations. So I'm going to go to another report I have open here. So here's the same principle. We're still talking about data quality. We're trying to validate some of these processes that are here. If we have same kind of principle, say we have a reporting cube and a planning cube, but now we've got some calculations. Maybe the beginning balances aren't showing up. Maybe the quarterly numbers aren't showing up correctly. Maybe the full year numbers aren't aggregating correctly. Maybe I'm getting, my balance sheet accounts are just showing activity when they should be showing balances. So you can play with these kind of test tools so that you set up a report that very quickly validates that things are working as they should, does the variance, and gets rid of a lot of the legwork of where is the variance, so that you can really drill into why is it there. So now, going back to the pain point of the processes, if something fails, you want to know something valuable from that. Okay, having process failed is not very useful message, but if you can see, okay, well, a process failed, and I know I can look at this report and I see a variance, I can look into it. It's part of that troubleshooting process, because I think the challenge for both business folks and IT folks is they get a message of something failed. What's the next step? What do they do? How do they troubleshoot it? And stuff like this helps facilitate that conversation, where if you can send someone an Excel spreadsheet and say, this is the variance that shouldn't be there. It's a really clear test. They know, okay, well, the expectation is that these numbers should all tie out. Right now they don't. So I'm going to go off and work on that until they do. And then when they come back, you've still got your test tool there as well. You can just run the same, tool to validate that it's as you expect. So it really crunches down the testing piece, and that helps get rid of the a lot of these challenges folks have. Another part of that, archiving. So archiving is the idea that if you've got scenarios, say you've got 2005 data in your cube right now, maybe you do want to do 10-year reporting off of that, but is it changing? It's probably not changing every night. Unless there's some kind of an archiving piece to what you have right now, that 2005 data is being recalculated every night. So even though the numbers aren't changing, the system is loading them, calculating them, saving them every night. So by archiving out some of that data, it just makes the nightly process that much faster. It only needs to work on the numbers that would actually be changing. And the data is still available in all the cubes. So that tends to speed up that nightly process. And also, something to think about is whether you're doing incremental loads or full loads. If you've got a large amount of transactions in your source system, incremental may be the way to go. Whereas if it's just a small thing, then maybe full is the right way. But there's pros and cons to that. Now, so the next one the next most popular one was some templates are so slow I fall asleep. So I'm going to guess that some folks here, everyone here is pretty comfortable with Clarity Studio, and they've probably played with some MDX. In case they haven't, or even if they have, I want to showcase something. MDX is really where you can, how do I say it? You can make sure you're getting exactly what you want in the template. Descendants and children are MDX functions, but by right-clicking in Studio, you can get options of that. There's no reason you can't extend that a bit, and there's lots of good sites out there. For extending that to make sure you're getting exactly what you want. So I pick this function here, accept. So if I'm building out a template and maybe there's one account I just don't want to choose, I just don't want to display. By using a little snippet and this accept function, I can get that right out of the template. I don't need to do anything fancy on the sheet. I just put it in a little snippet and it's done. And there's so many other functions to play with. There's a lot. If you're having trouble articulating exactly what you want to see in a row or a column, some kind of ordering or what have you, chances are there's ways to articulate it with the MDX stuff. It can get a little complicated. We can help with that if you'd like, but there are good resources out there to help with that as well. Now, on the topic of saving, the relational write-back piece is probably the single biggest help that I've seen with different clients. On most Clarity solutions, when the data is saved back to the cube, it's saved as row by row. So if you're saving 10 rows from a template, not such a big deal. But if you're saving 100 rows, 1,000 rows, maybe 20 columns with 100 rows, it gets pretty large. Relational write-back is a feature. It's been around since Clarity 6, so it's something that even some folks on Clarity 6 may have used there, but they made some pretty big improvements in Clarity 7 to make it much more robust and fast. So if you've got relational write-back set up on your queue, when it does a save from the template, it actually saves it as one shot. So it just sends the whole chunk of rows and columns to the database and does the save. And most saves come back in seconds. Not to say it's always the case, but if a template's saving in 30 seconds to a minute with a native write-back, it could go down to less than 5 seconds. Some can go less than 5 seconds with a relational write-back. So that's something to think about if your templates are still quite slow. And also linked documents and zooming. Sometimes something to think about is you really need to show 1,000 rows on a particular template, or maybe do you want to have a template that is linked to something else, linked to that more detail, or let folks zoom in on something. So let's go on to the next one here. High-level changes in the plan. So versioning is a pretty common piece that folks have to copy data between different years and scenarios. What-if modeling is something that's a little less common. Depending on your implementation, you may or may not have what-if modeling set up. Let's take a look back in Clarity now. So if we're logged into Clarity, you'll probably see a modeling tab. The versioning page itself is not all that exciting. You'll see copy from, copy to. You can pick your entity. For a lot of folks, this probably doesn't even work. It's probably never been configured. And even if it has been, it's kind of limited to, it's usually limited to just the year and scenario. You can't really do much more with that. Now what we've done for some folks is we've extended that idea with the Clarity, some of the stuff that's in Clarity 7, when you can actually kind of set up rules to be applied. So this is the idea that maybe I'm going to take, I'll start with my budget version 1. I apologize if this is too small. I wonder if I can increase that. Sorry. But yeah, so let's say we're starting with our budget version 1. We're going to take a copy of that. Actually, let's use this one here. So we'll take a copy of budget version 1. We're going to copy it over to what-if 2. We're going to apply some assumptions to it, and then we end up with whatever assumptions applied in that scenario. So if you want to maybe have something applied to a particular account, particular department, a group, whatever dimensionality is in your cube, you get that granularity to choose exactly what it's related to. And in this case, you're not limited to the bottom level leaves. You don't have to go down and pick exactly one account. You could pick all of revenue. So if you wanted to say, take a copy of my budget, store it as what-if 1, bump revenue by 10%, decrease expenses by 15%, and then let's see what that looks like. So that kind of high-level what-if modeling, a lot of folks can see value in that because we often get questions. What would it look like if, for the remainder of the year, our revenues 10% higher or 10% lower? What would that look like? And it just applies those assumptions with and there's a lot of granularity. You can choose. Do you want to see the detail? Do you not want to see the detail? But you can apply different levels in your dimensionality for your cube. Okay, well, also when it comes to data quality, that's something we can talk about for just a bit. So another question I've gotten from folks is, how do I test stuff? So the variance reports we looked at, that's a good way to test stuff. You could even automate that kind of stuff so it runs nightly and, just compares. If you had a report book that runs every night, you compare that to, say, Excel files that you've saved off that are good. You can every night have a full regression test running. I think that can be quite common, quite helpful for folks because they know that proactively in the morning they can get an email saying, hey, something happened in the build last night where there weren't any errors, but these numbers changed. Are we expecting that? So it helps with not just did the process run, but is the data of the right quality? Is there something, is there a problem from a qualitative perspective? Again, I guess from a data quality thing, another thing I see is people have a hard time doing rolling planning. So I want to touch on that for a minute. So here we're in Cube Manager. Apologize for jumping around if I'm doing that too much, but we're in Cube Manager. We're looking at two dimensions. There's a time dimension and there's a scenario dimension. And for those, sorry, one moment here. Yeah, so we have a time dimension and a scenario dimension. In the time dimension, you probably see something similar to what I have here for a full year. You've got an opening balance, you're going to have your quarters, and that's about it. When it comes to rolling periods, it's useful to know what's our current period. And what are the historical periods? Maybe I want to build a template or more, maybe even a dashboard that says, show me the current period and the last 6. I could put some stuff in the, on the sheet to start figuring that out, and maybe build some, some fancy logic somewhere to do that. But this is a much simpler way of doing it. You just add these members to your cube, and from a template perspective, they just show up in Template Builder, or pardon me, in Clarity Studio as members in the time dimension. So if you build a template and you've selected C00 off the hierarchy, you can be guaranteed that's always the current period. And if you want to get fancy, you can say, well, maybe my current period for actuals, maybe it's the last month that we've closed. So, period. Let's say, I guess really period 1. Say it's January or if it's a calendar year, maybe period 1 of 2014 is our actuals. We could go in and maybe for our budget, maybe it's the end of the year. Maybe we're fine with, if the current period is here for budget, that should be the end of the year. And we can play with that. It depends on the type of analysis that you want to do to make things easier for yourself. But I think the key point here is that by adding members to a time dimension, you can make things easier for yourself when you're building the templates and reports. You don't need to add in all this complicated logic to figure out what a current period or current year should be, and then show that. Or or in the worst case, you don't need to every month go into all these templates and reports and change the month, change the default month to something. Okay, so if I go back to our list here, I'm going to check the chat quickly. Were there any questions on these pieces? Can't quite see this here. Sorry, just a moment. Okay, we use properties for current year. Yeah, that I thought I saw that. So right now, and this is pertinent to this conversation, by using properties, and this is actually a very common way this is used. So folks can come in here and just the same layout that we have in Cube Manager, they can set the property of the current month, the current year. Really, properties can be used for a variety of different things. Those properties get loaded into the cube just as they probably do right now. But what we can do is you set up these additional members so it hides that from anyone that's building templates or reports. They don't need to know that it's using a property to figure out what 8 periods ago was. All they need to know is that they can pick H08 and they get something from 8 periods ago. So properties are still probably a good way of doing it, but exposing them as dimension members rather than making folks try and figure out property MDX stuff on a sheet it can be complicated, and it's not very fast either. Being able to pull stuff from a dimension member in the cube that's already been calculated, that's going to be faster than trying to figure out, different periods and years on the sheet and then doing something that way. So let's see, we talked about processes failing, we talked about templates being slow, talked about making high-level changes with, with modeling and versioning. So we talked about a little bit about data quality. Capture rolling periods easily, variance report, talk about variance reports. Okay, server issues. So this may be more for folks administering servers, but has anyone ever cleared out their audit trail? If you've been using Clarity for a number of years now, if you've got an audit trail that goes back 3, 4, 5, 10 years, all that data is still sitting there on the server, and it can grow into the gigs of data. That's really not very valuable. Maybe there's a debug folder of tracing that happens. So some folks don't know that depending on the logging options that you've got, because it's related to logs, but depending on the logging options you've got, there's a lot of files saved on the server that just chew up disk space. And then similarly, I'll talk a little bit about the archiving piece, but if you just get rid of old scenario and year data, that tends to speed things up as well. Archiving is an option if it's still active, but if it's just a case where it's never going to be used again, then you might as well just delete it. Take a last backup and then delete it. Backups, I know it's not a very glamorous subject, but everyone should be running full backups nightly. They should have a transaction log backup every 5 minutes, and that'll give you a maximum data loss of 5 minutes. So begs the question, do you know how much data you will lose if your system crashes? The concern is that if you don't know, then it could be a lot more than that. I've been to a lot of places, I've seen a lot of clients that unfortunately just don't even do regular backups. They might do it once a month. And if a hard drive dies or for whatever reason there's some kind of disaster, then you lose all of that data since that last backup. That doesn't need to be the case. Now that begs the next question, is disaster recovery. Who would you call if the system went down? Do you know who would perform the disaster recovery steps, and do you know how long the system would be down for, and could it come back? So unfortunately, sometimes Clarity servers are set up as just a single server machine. Folks they only have one machine. They don't have a dev, test, and production environment. So when they lose that one machine, that's their production environment, they have to rebuild an entirely new machine. There's a lot of ways to recover from a disaster, but you're going to need to have that conversation to figure out, well, what's acceptable. I mean, if someone tells you that there's not going to be any data loss if a system goes down, that's very unlikely. 5 minutes is usually, from Microsoft's, a lot of Microsoft's documentation, 5 minutes is the acceptable data loss for these kind of applications. Doing much more than that ends up slowing down the system for actual usage. So it's a delicate balance. You can try and get it down to a minute or less, but there's different strategies you have to do that. Okay, so I had one question came up about just you're working with Clarity. You'll see that a warning come up saying. I don't have an example ready for you, but when you're saving something, is it okay for Clarity to save a document on your file, on your local file system? And you click OK, and after a while you don't even realize you just click OK. Those you can get rid of those. We've got some instructions on how to do that. So if that's a concern, let me know, and I can send you the link for that piece. And security. Given our time now, I'll go into the Q&A now. But if folks want to talk about security, there's other security stuff I can do. So one question came up from folks that registered, and they said, "How can I get balance sheet data from my data extraction rather than ASAT? How do I get balance sheet data from my data extraction so it's ASAT rather than activity?" For this kind of situation, a couple questions come up. Is there a value dimension? If there's a value dimension, then you can kind of organize it so that you've got a closing member, and the children of that would be the opening activity and the adjustment. So that gives you the flexibility. You can really, if you're looking at a balance sheet account, you can pick out the activity, or you can look at the closing balance. Is there a time balance property? Sometimes it's done that way, where there's a property in the accounts dimension where you can figure out whether an account is set up to just take the last balance or sum up everything like income statement accounts. Also, different measures. So quite common. I think the best practice is to always load activity, be it balance sheet activity or income statement activity. You just load that into your cube as the period activity, and then you put in calculations for year to date, quarter to date, and balances. Because the lowest grain is going to be the activity in a period, and if you have an opening balance member in your time dimension, then your balance for a balance sheet account is just going to be that year to date. So that's the last question. Do you have a P0 member in your time dimension? If you don't, then that's going to probably make it more difficult to do balance sheet to report on balance sheet information. So there's a couple different approaches to look at balance sheet data. Another question came up. What are jobs and events used for? So jobs are really focused on something that's going to run on the server. So this is something that, maybe if you, I know some of the old versioning scripts, you go to a web page, you'd hit the button, and then your screen would go white for a couple of minutes. And then you'd have to just kind of pray that it comes back and hope that you don't get some kind of a timeout error. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So that's where they came up with the idea of jobs, is you can just trigger something to run on the server, and it'll just run. It won't lock your screen while it's running. So maybe you want to run a versioning script on the server on save. Maybe you want to run a backup on save. Maybe you want to run the nightly refresh when something is saved from a particular template. So jobs are really focused about some kind of a process that you want to run on the server that you don't want to have lock your screen. Now events are more about when do things happen. So if you think of jobs as what is happening, events are when are they happening. So sometimes maybe you want to, if someone's looking at a piece of maybe HR employees, maybe they'll want to lock a particular record when they double click. So if they open up a particular employee, then it locks that record, so no one else can make changes to it. And maybe once they're done with it, they can double click to unlock it. So that would be you do that with an event. It doesn't either really run anything on the server. It's just you want it to happen on a particular event. Showing properties on page options. So there's a question on this one. Properties can only be shown at the intersection level, and properties don't aggregate. So there probably are ways that you can figure out how to display the properties of your page options, but I would probably steer away from it. If you're trying to put properties in your page options, there's probably an opportunity to create some kind of a new dimension member that you use instead, and that'll just abstract that complexity put that into the cube so that it's consistent across all your templates and reports. Versioning. Less than full, so less than full data. So that would be the modeling piece that I went over a little earlier. If you want to version data, just for one entity, maybe just for one period, the modeling is the right fit for that. It lets you pick with a very fine granularity what you want to copy from one place to another, and also if you want to make adjustments to it for some of any kind of assumptions. And the document management, there was a question around document management. I think for version control, if this is meant around version control, I think we just commonly use folders. You could use some kind of a source code control system, but as you probably know, there's not really a good link to any existing source code control pieces. So keeping things simple of just using a folder for development or folder for testing, that's about it. Okay. So let me go look back at the chat now, if there's any unanswered questions here. So positioning docs. Let's see, question from Anshu. Hey, Kit, can you just tell me what's the question I should address first here? I'm having trouble seeing it here.
Yeah, there's a question came in is, what is the advantage of FixPack 2? So, as you know, IBM tries to do quarterly releases, and with each FixPack, they address certain fixes or product defects that they find. Now, with FixPack 2, obviously there are product defects that are out there, but also what's particularly important about FixPack 2 is some of the main features. It now allows you to have IE10, so it supports IE10. It supports Microsoft Windows 8, as well as support for Windows Server 2012 and SQL Server 2012, and also Analysis Services 2012. So that's the major feature of FixPack 2 if you're planning to, your network IT people are planning to move up to the latest versions of IE and and Windows 8. Other than that, there are specific bug fixes which can be found on the fix list. If you go to the IBM website, you can do a search on Clarity7 721 FP2, and then one of the search that comes up, it gives you a list of everything that's fixed in that particular version. So, hope that answers your question. All right, well, Bob, I'm just going to go.
While you're on.
Sorry, Ingo.
Yeah, I was just going to say, while you're on IE there, with that question, there was another question, I'll just read it out, that came in. Our IT always rolls out IE updates, which render Clarity menu settings unusable. Is there a better way to manage this other than manually resetting the defaults to the prescribed Clarity settings?
Good question.
I think that's something that, in some IT shops, their settings are based upon a central push, and unfortunately, that's not within our control to govern any corporation's IT policy. So if there's a policy to roll out IE with a certain set of settings, then you will have to probably speak with the IT manager and let them know what Clarity-specific settings that you need to have. With the install guide, there is a set of IE settings that'll make your browser run properly. So if you were to just forward that to the IT department, they can incorporate that into their push.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kit. And I think if they can maybe have a special group for Clarity users, most corporations will have a Clarity users group that's a domain group, and then the Clarity settings would apply to that group as part of that rollout. But I mean, I think IT controls that for good reason. I think they'll continue to control it. They just need to know that there's special requirements for the Clarity users folks.
Okay.
I see another question here. What would the VBS syntax for launching a particular linked document using double-click? That's another good one. So,
okay, so I'm assuming that the situation here is you want to, from within a Clarity report or template, double-click on something and launch a VBS. So the first thing you have to do is to ensure that you have your custom VBS code added to the document. So in the advanced section of Studio, you have to ensure that that's mapped to it. And then within that is where you create your code. And then as part of the event, I believe, Bob, there's a double-click event on double-click. Is that something like that?
Yep.
So under that particular event, you would then invoke the code that you want to use.
Yeah. So let's see a question from Stacy. Are there user guides out there that will explain how to set up dashboards and workflow, etc.? So there's the admin guide that should come with you. It should be on your Clarity server. That's a PDF. If it's not there, you can download from the IBM site. We can send you a link for that. But it will tell you the general pieces around it. From my experience, it doesn't really walk you through the steps on how to get that done. But I would look at the IBM website for that PDF or on your server for that one.
And we are more than happy to help you set that up.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another question here from Stan. Some of our studio reports return relatively small amounts of data, say 20 accounts on rows, and January to December on the columns. The build time could be 20 seconds, other time it's 2 or 3 seconds. How can we investigate what causes the bottlenecks?
Good question. So if you use SQL Profiler, so SQL Profiler is a tool to monitor what's happening at the database or the cube level. Pretty common approach would be you turn on your traces with the for the database and also the cube. You open up the report, you change something, hit save, and then you look at the trace data to see where are the slow points happening. It might not even be at the database. If it's not at the database, then that at least tells us it's something to do with the particular template or report. And if that's the case, then we can start looking at the Clarity logs. So the Clarity log file itself, I can show you where that lives. That's going to give us some detail into what's happening as as this thing is building. So a lot of the time, if you're encountering slow reports or templates, then you can look at the Clarity server logs. So you'll find that in your Clarity systems, Clarity server logs folder, and this just gives you an idea of you can see by templates what's really going on. The error level, and it depends on your logging level too. So let me show you the logging piece. So under administration for Clarity7, you'll have a logging configuration. If you want to push the logging right down to the debug level, and then you run that same piece, the template's going to run slower because it's logging a whole lot more information, but you'll get a little bit more insight into what's taking the longest piece of time.
I also see a question, although Bob answered, I'm just going to add to it. So does Template Builder work on Windows 7? The quick answer is yes, but as you know, IBM stopped supporting Clarity 6, our version. So even though it might work on Windows 7, I highly doubt that IBM will support you if there is a problem that you encounter while running it. It's not necessarily Windows 7 is the issue, but I think partly it's the version of Excel. It's also the issue. So be careful when you're running Template Builder on Windows 7, especially make sure that you have a compatible version of Excel. I believe I've seen it work up to 2007. I'm not sure about 2010 and up.
Okay. Well, I think let's. Any other questions there that we haven't addressed, or is it time to wrap up now?
Well, anybody have any questions? Please feel free to type it in, and we will answer it to the best of our ability.
Okay. Great. So Ian, I guess I'll pass it back to you now if you want to let folks know how they can get a hold of us and such.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for those insights. I know we covered a lot of different issues and topics and different tips and tricks across a variety of areas. Hopefully we touched on some of the key areas that each of you on the call were looking for. I've put up our contact screen that hopefully you can see. You can reach us on a number of social media venues as well as by email and by phone. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, send us an email, or hit us on Twitter, and we will follow that and we will answer any questions. And as Kit mentioned as well, we of course are happy to connect with you directly for support in any of these kind of areas. We support quite a number of Clarity clients across North America, and so being able to set up something with you to help you with your key issues or any larger type projects, we're happy to do that. But beyond that, if you do have any other nagging tips and tricks that you're looking for, just send us a line and we would be happy to answer that. So I think we are almost at the top of the hour and all of our questions have been answered unless anything else did come in. Did anything else come in, folks, in the meantime?
I just see a question about Visualizer. Is graphing only available in Visualizer, not in Studio? So Unfortunately, that's the case. There's no graphing or charting in Clarity Studio. That's strictly in Visualizer.
All right, good. Thanks, Bob. And so thank you, everyone, for joining our call. We're happy to continue to do these again, so send us your notes, and if there's more tips and tricks that we can share with you, we will host another webinar in the coming time frame. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time and for joining us here today. And we will turn the call off now and connect with you at a later date. Thank you very much.